We're going to go to the phone lines, Pastor Carl. I believe we have Mary from Hilton Head, South Carolina. Good morning, Mary. You are live with Pastor Carl. What is your question?
Oh, good morning, Pastor Carl.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Dr. Broggi. My question is, I was invited to a worship service with my I was invited, and I decided that I was going to go and take my granddaughter along with me to pray and worship to God. The person that invited me told me that maybe it wouldn't be a good idea for me to bring my granddaughter because they were going to be slain in this spirit. I don't know what that meant, and so I ended up not going because I didn't know that, and I thought that it wasn't appropriate for my 12-year-old granddaughter to attend, being that she was of that age. That is probably something that I didn't need to attend either, so we did not. But so if you could just tell me what slain in the spirit means, I'm going to hang up and listen for your response.
Well, Mary, I'm glad you didn't go to the service because it was an unhealthy church, and you would not have wanted to expose your granddaughter to that utter confusion. And so in certain Pentecostal realms, there are different excesses and expressions that are just not biblical. One is like speaking in the ecstatic utterances, which no doubt they do in this church that you would have attended as well, which again, we just described in one of the earlier questions in this hour that biblical tongues was a real language and a real dialect, and it's not the utterances that we see today. But also accompanied in some of these churches are what they call being slain in the spirit. Benny Hinn, who I think is just divorcing his wife for the second time, as reported last week. He's a fake, he's a fraud, he's a phony. There's a whole lot more to his life that I can't go on the air and tell, but I am aware of through personal contacts of those who have worked with him, and it will probably come out at some point. But, he'll touch one person and 10 people will fall backwards, and there'll be folks there to catch him, and they call that being slain in the spirit. If you ask them, well, where in Scripture do you find this? They'll take you to John chapter 18, where, if you remember, we're told that Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the Scripture says that he was going to be arrested. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine of the Kidron. The Kidron Valley is between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives, and at the base of the Mount of Olives, there's this garden which he entered with his disciples. And it's the Garden of Gethsemane. Gethsemane literally means an olive press. Now, Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. It was a quiet place. It was a good place to go and pray and talk. And Judas then, having received the Roman cohort, and a cohort is a battalion, and a Roman battalion could be typically 600. That would be the typical battalion, unless you had the large battalion that would be 1,000 men. And of course, this particular battalion, as we'll see, was 1,000 people. So this battalion comes, and Judas, having, as the parallel accounts tell us, greeted Jesus with a kiss. That's how you greet people, just as we saw the president of Turkey greet the president of Iran the other day with a kiss on both cheeks. That's their way of shaking hands, and so in the Jewish culture. So he identified him to the commander because the commander didn't know which one. And Jesus turned to the commander. He said, "Whom do you seek?" They said, "Jesus the Nazarene." He said to them, "I am." Now, he is italicized in the Greek, in the English Bible. And italicism in the New Testament does not mean that it's emphasized like we might use italics, or sometimes we use italics to highlight a foreign language. It's used to describe a word that's not in the original, but typically supplied by the translators to make it grammatically flow. But literally, he just says, "I am." And Judas, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, "I am," or "I am he," you could render it, they drew back and fell to the ground. It's the word pipto. They all fell to the ground. It's found in another place in Hebrews 11, where God describes an Old Testament event where supernaturally God pushes down the walls of Jericho so that the Jewish people could go in and conquer the city. And on this occasion, Jesus by his declaration, I am. It's the word Yahweh, the sacred name of God in Scripture, when he simply takes the divine name to his lips, the name by which Moses was told is God's most sacred covenant name. All of them, including Judas, fall backwards. They're all on their backs. And so, again, he is just affirming a truth that he said in John chapter 10, that no one is going to take my life. I'm going to give it. I have authority to lay it down. I have authority to take it up. So this is not the biblical basis for being slain in the Spirit. What you're seeing in some circles is pure acting. They have people who agree to, quote unquote, fall backwards. But most often it's just extreme emotionalism, and sometimes it's satanic. So it's evil. It's not biblical. So as I stated earlier with the question on the gift of tongues, experience does not drive my theology. Scripture does. Experience is always to be subjected to the authority of Scripture. So if this was a practice that the church should do today, wouldn't you expect to see Paul teach it in the epistles? Would you not expect to see it modeled in the first 30 years of church history as recorded in the Acts? And the answer is yes. So when I dialogue with these people who are typically in these churches, and you might want to simply ask the individual who invited you a couple of questions. I have a booklet entitled, Would You Like to Know God as Your Friend? You can ask for it at Search the Scriptures. I'm happy to mail it to you. You can go online and go to searchthescriptures.org and click on the homepage, that presentation. But before you do, ask your friend, say, well, you obviously have an interest in spiritual things to the point where you wanted to invite me to participate in your church. And I always want to be sensitive to where people are at in their journey. Let me ask you a question. On a scale of 0 to 100, 0, I don't know, 100, I'm positive. How sure are you if you died right now, you'd go to heaven? Now, Pentecostals, and this is a Pentecostal flavored church of one type or another, and there's different brands. They deny the doctrine of eternal security. They say you can lose your salvation. So what typically people hear is if you can do something to lose your salvation, that's Arminianism, then you have to do something to earn your salvation. And that's heresy. And so ask her how sure she is on a 0 to 100. Don't be surprised if she says less than 100. If she says less than 100, then you know she's not saved yet. She may say 100, and she may give you reasons like, well, I've been slain in the Spirit. I've spoken in tongues. But she won't give you the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And I would warn even against the Jesus plus plan. It's not Jesus died, was buried, and was raised, and I get slain in the Spirit, and I speak in tongues, and I get baptized. It's Christ alone, or there's no salvation at all. And so you might want to ask her, how certain she is, and if she were to die and God said, why should I let you into heaven, what would you say? I think you might be surprised. I would say somewhere around 70% of people who visit Community Bible Church who come from an Assemblies of God, Church of God, of one brand or another, have no assurance of salvation. They're lost, but they've had these experiences. That's just how the devil works. Thank God you didn't bring your granddaughter to that gross error.
Dr. Carl Broggi answers your questions about the Bible and living the Christian life Tuesday mornings at 11 on The Light, 88.7 FM, and online around the world at wagp.net.